and thank you for joining our panel. My name is Denise Venturi. I am a PhD researcher at the Catholic University of Leuven, and I research on LGBTI refugees, so this panel is definitely of interest to me. And I am delighted to be the chair of this panel, as we are going to touch upon some of the most interesting issues when it comes to asylum claims based on sexual orientation and gender identity. During this panel, we will have 3 presentations, and the first 2 will be delivered by Gerardo Petrillo and Edward Motebi, and the third one will be jointly delivered by Dr. Nina Helt and Dr. Menja Chaler. All these presentations will be focused on Europe, and then will engage us in topical issues in relation to asylum claims based on sexual orientation and gender identity. Namely, we are going to explore how these claims are adjudicated at European level and how the jurisprudence of European courts has dealt with these matters so far, particularly in relation to data. But as this program was not rich enough, we will also discuss how the COVID-19 pandemic has impacted on the lives of LGBTIQ+ refugees in Europe, and especially how the pandemic and this situation and the measures taken have exacerbated the isolation of LGBTI+ refugees. Before leaving the floor to our panelists, I would just like to provide you with a few housekeeping rules. All presentation will be recorded and posted online, but the Q&A session will not be recorded. Each presentation will last 15 minutes, and we will have time for questions after the 3 presentations. And I would kindly remind all panelists to please stick to your allocated time, so we have enough time for question and answers at the end. In the interest of confidentiality and given also the number of participants, we are not able to open the discussion to oral questions, but participants can ask questions and also make comments by using the chat box here on Zoom, and we will then select as many questions as possible based on the time that we will have for discussion. I would like also to thank a lot to Magdalena, who will assist today with all the technical issues related to Zoom. And I think that's it for my introduction. I would just like to give the floor to panelists. And I would like to give the virtual floor to our first speaker, Gerardo Petrillo. Gerardo, if it's okay, I will introduce you. So,
sure.
Hello. So Gerardo was born in 1992 in Italy. He graduated in languages and intercultural communication in the Euro-Mediterranean area in 2019 with a thesis on LGBTIQ asylum seekers in the EU. And he has published a paper in February 2020 on the same issues. Gerardo is currently attending a postgraduate master in international cooperation. And today he will be delivering a presentation on the protection of LGBTIQ asylum seekers, on the evolution of the jurisprudence of the 2 European courts and the assessment of credibility. So Gerardo, the floor is yours and you have 15 minutes.
Thank you, Denise, for this introduction. And I'm so honored to be here today, because it's a very important issue, this one I'm going to discuss about. I was born and raised in Italy, which is one of the European countries at the frontiers of the Mediterranean Sea. Italian government is still arranging agreements with Libyan Coast Guard in a desperate and, let me say, inappropriate attempt to contain African migration flows. In this controversial geopolitical picture, Italian jurisprudence and the Italian Corte di Cassazione has been confirming themselves as good example of good practice in the field of SOGI asylum claims, as well as European jurisprudence and law has been evolving for the last 10 years in order to provide the best degree of protection to people fleeing homotransphobia. Now I'm going to share a short presentation with you because I would like to, okay. Okay. So the first thing that I would like to do is to take a look at a wider picture. Up to this day, there are still about 70 countries in the world where LGBTIQ people are being discriminated, humiliated, persecuted, tortured, unfairly imprisoned, and executed on the basis of a misbelief that wants that homosexuality, bisexuality, being a transgender person, and more in general, all kinds of different different expression of sexual orientation and gender identity other than heterosexuality and the culturally accepted division of genders are wrong and unnatural. What I'm going to discuss about today is the evolution of European jurisprudence and law in the field of SOGI asylum claims. And I'm going to discuss about some biases found in the process of assessment of the credibility of LGBTIQ asylum seekers, focusing on both a case F of 2018 from the Court of Justice of the European Union and on the improper use of the performance-based test of Rorschach in this topic and the consequential violation of human rights. But first, I think that a short juridical framework is needed in order to better comprehend the evolution and the groundbreaking decision of the judges of the Court of Justice. The milestone for the protection of refugees is the United Nations Convention on the Status of Refugees, which states the rights and the duties of people who can be considered refugees. In order to be eligible for the status of refugee, a person has to demonstrate that they have a well-founded fear of being persecuted in their country of origin for their race, nationality, political opinion, religion, or for being members of a particular social group. Although the convention does not provide a clear definition for the concept of persecution, the Qualification Directive of 2011 of European Parliament provides a definition which describes it as any action sufficiently serious by its nature or repetition as to constitute a severe violation of basic human rights. To get more into our subject, another important step made by the Qualification Directive relates to the grounds of persecution which are stated into the Convention of Geneva at Articles 1 and 33, but not explained. The Qualification Directive at Article 10 does it, and I would like to focus on the membership of a particular social group, of course, and at letter D, last comma, the Qualification Directive describes this membership of a particular social group as a group of people that are united by a common feature that is innate or so fundamental for their human dignity that no one should be compelled to forsake them. And in this definition, the Qualification Directive includes also those groups based on the common feature of sexual orientation or gender identity. What I have to say is that also this paragraph shows how the European legislator has worked to clarify some shadowy points of the Convention in order to make it less open and inclined to different interpretation. Stated that, I would like to direct our attention today to two important aspects for the protection of LGBTIQ asylum seekers, which are the discretion requirement and the causal nexus. The discretion requirement is applied by some countries of destination as a preliminary form of self-protection from persecution. It means nothing more than that the claimant has to demonstrate that they try to conceal their gender identity or sexual orientation in the country of origin in order to protect themselves from persecution. This mechanism used is based on a kind of splitting homosexual people into discrete and non-discrete homosexual people. The High Commissioner for Refugees strongly addressed this misconception, stating that a discrete conduct is never to be considered a form of protection from discrimination. On the other hand, the causal nexus has been introduced both in the UN Guidelines on International Protection number 9 on 2012 and in Qualification Directive at Article 10, paragraph 2, And it is considered to be the link between the persecution and the reason why that persecutory act is perpetrated against the person. It can be divided into external and internal nexus. Well, if a person object of persecution actually possesses the features that expose them to persecution, we will talk about the external nexus. Otherwise, if the person does not possess them, but is the actor of persecution that attributes them with these features, we will talk about the internal nexus. This distinction leads us to two different approaches used by some national courts for the interpretation of membership to a particular social group, which are the protected characteristic approach and the social perception approach. The protected characteristic approach examines whether a group is united either by an innate or immutable characteristic or by a characteristic that is so fundamental to human dignity that no one should be compelled to forsake it. On the other hand, the social perception approach examines whether a particular social group shares a common characteristic which makes it cognizable or sets the group's member apart from society at large. These two approaches has to be intended as alternative and not cumulative. This is a very important thing. Given this, let me present the case F of 2018 from the Court of Justice of the European Union. A short introduction. This case is about an asylum seeker from Nigeria that after seeing his claim rejected due to the results of a psychological test which seemed not to support his statement of being homosexual, filed an appeal to the administrative court in Hungary. Consequently, the appointed judge questioned the Court of Luxembourg about the correct interpretation of European law, and more specifically about the possibility to use psychological tests to assess the sexual orientation of LGBTIQ asylum seekers. What the Court of Luxembourg did was to came up with what we can probably define as the most groundbreaking decision in the field so far, appealing to the so-called proportionality principle. What it says is that although psychological tests can be used in the process of assessment of credibility of an asylum seeker, and it is not forbidden by European law, it is to be noted that in this present case, a psychological test was disproportionate and excessive, since what had to be assessed was the actual existence of the well-founded fear of persecution for the seeker and not the actual sexual orientation of the person. What I mean is that what had to be assessed was the actual membership of the claimant to a particular social group, the SOGI group in this case. In fact, if a person is not an homosexual person, but the agents of persecutory act consider them as such, the person's fear to be persecuted is to be considered well-founded, according to the definition of internal nexus that we've seen just 2 minutes ago. In addition, in a very peremptory way, let me say, the judges of Luxembourg also stated that according to both European law and Yogyakarta principle, no one should be compelled to undergo any kind of psychological test for the assessment of their sexual orientation or gender identity, being them a sort of violation of their human rights, and being this felt by the claimant as something that could make them feel at a situation of unease, because they might feel forced to open up about some intimate aspects of their life, especially when the test is not necessary and when the information required might be collected during a simple interview. What emerges from this case is the step forward performed by the judges of Court of Justice and the evolution of European jurisprudence in providing the best and more inclusive interpretation of European law in the field of LGBTIQ asylum seekers. It is also to be noted that, as per several researches carried out in the last 50 years, medical exams and psychological tests are inappropriate and worthless for the assessment of someone's sexual orientation, being they're used in this specific field based on what sociologists call the heterosexual bias, which is the erroneous system of values that permeates our society, which wants that heterosexuality is more acceptable, more natural, and more correct than homosexuality. In addition to that, both medical exams, such as the plethysmography exam, and psychological tests, such as the performance-based test of Rorschach, are also to be considered a violation to basic human rights and human dignity, such as, they violate the right to private life, the right to privacy, the right to protection to medical abuses, and the prohibition of torture. It is my personal opinion that the field of SOGI asylum claims and the assessment of the credibility of LGBTIQ asylum seekers is a very sensitive field. LGBTIQ asylum seekers are more vulnerable than other asylum seekers, since the basis of their claims are to be founded in something that belongs to their personal identity and that is very hard to assess and prove, therefore. On the other hand, European states find more and more difficulties in finding a uniformity in their states' policies, and so this makes it even harder to create a common asylum system, especially when it comes to SOGI asylum claims. There are many procedural problems and biases that are also concurring to make this process even more confused, leading to the risk to make asylum seekers suffer new psychological violence and see their basic human rights violated again, even in the countries they arrive at, seeking a better life and a new chance to live. I would like to thank you for your attention, but first of all, before stopping my presentation, I would like to say a couple of words, which I feel so much. What I would like to say is that what we are talking about are people that had suffered and probably are still suffering horrible things, whose life has been destroyed and whose rights have been violated, who had lived and had fled their homelands and abandoned their dear ones in order to escape a life of discrimination, pain, suffering, death, covering, and, also framing their own identity in a desperate attempt to comply with unacceptable social norms, and in order to do something that is so natural and that is so basic that it even hurts me to say that, in order to just survive. So thank you for your attention.
Thanks a lot, Gerardo, for your presentation and for sticking to the time. Indeed, thanks a lot. And thank you also for shedding light on the F judgment of the Court of Justice of the European Union, which is the last judgment delivered by the court on SOGI claims. And indeed, it follows, let's say, the lead of the previous judgment by the court on credibility and on the need to respect human rights and human dignity when assessing credibility. Now, I will kindly ask you to turn off your video and to Edward instead to switch on his video. Edward, can you hear me? Yeah. Okay, there you go. So I would now pass to Edward. Edward Mutebi is an LGBTI plus human rights activist and the founder of an LGBTI human rights organization called Let's Walk Uganda, based in Uganda. His commitment and love for the safety of others puts Edward himself in danger and prompted him to escape from Uganda, seeking asylum in Germany. During his time in Uganda, Edward worked selflessly to fight for equality for LGBTI persons in his country. And among his main achievements was the start of an organization which became a safe housing project and saved many LGBTI homeless youths in precarious situations. So Edward's presentation is titled "How are SOGI-related asylum claims legally adjudicated at domestic, EU, and Council of Europe levels?" So it follows also Gerardo's presentation. Now, Edward, the floor is yours, and you have 15 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Denise. And I want to appreciate, first of all, the opportunity that I have received. It's quite an honor for me to be part of this workshop, and you know, it's a very good thing that we refugees ourselves are being given this opportunity to take part in such crucial matters that really touch us and also touch so many other people out there. The question has been read to you by Denise, but allow me to say it again. The question is how are SOGI-related asylum claims legally adjudicated domestic, EU, and Council of European levels? You will forgive me, I didn't make a slide about all this, but I have all the points that I want to share with you here with me. I divided this whole question into 3 parts because it's a very, very important, crucial question. And I was able to divide it in 3 parts. And these 3 parts include how the process goes. How does the asylum process goes in the first place? And then the second question, the second part is causes of negative judgment. The word adjudication simply means judgment. It's just the word, it's just an amplified one, but in a simple case, it means judgment. And then the last segment is the possible solutions to all these judgments, either positive or negative judgments. And I'm going to take Germany as a case study because I've been in Germany for now nearly 2 years, and I know I know much information in Germany than any other country because I've not been that so able to travel so much to other parts of the European Union. So first of all, the first part, which is how the process goes. The process simply, for the case of Germany, we have 2 processes. This is, for example, in Banff, when you come here in Germany, you undergo Banff, and Banff has to take it does 2 interviews, and the first interview is about the Dublin examination, and then the second interview is always about hearing whether you deserve the asylum or you don't deserve it. And then we also have another part whereby in case your case deserves to be passed on, or for example, if you're given a negative result from the Banff, then you can go to courts of law here in Germany. And we have had so many cases here for SOGI members who have been given negative results by the Banff, and this has been as a result of several factors that I'm going to share with you in my second segment. So as I said, we have Banff, and Banff does 2 hearings, and last hearing, which is the determinatory hearing, whether you deserve the asylum status or not. So many times it comes out negative, and so many asylum seekers are able to run to courts of law to seek more answers from there. And in the same case, in the courts of law, the same issue happens, that most asylum seekers on the SOGI based, they receive still negatives, or they are denied their asylum status still by the courts of law. Only maybe to identify, this year, there was a victory in Munich, whereby a lesbian or a SOGI member from an organization I know very well called Letra, who are my friends as well, received a good result from court. This time round, court judged in a very positive way, and this lady received the asylum protection. But this had taken some time, because when I had a personal talk with this lady who was given the asylum status by the courts in Munich, she told me she was fighting in court for over 10 years. So we see that usually when you go to court, the asylum process, the process takes longer in courts of law, and than even it does with Banff. So just not to dwell so much on the first part, I want to go on the very important, crucial part, which is the influential factors that lead to the negative because as the question says, how are these cases judged? And in my view, I find that these cases are judged in a negative way, and people receive negatives. The SOGI members usually receive negatives, and unlike a few who receive, who are able to get a positive answer from the BAMF or from the courts of law, most of the cases receive negative responses from these two bodies. So the influential factors, some of the factors I was able to list down include some of the few, they may not be all, but a few that I was able to note. We have the issues of color, and we have issues of religion, we have issues of country of origin, we have issues of introduction of new laws in Germany, and then sociocultural differences. Just to explain a little bit about all these factors, for the issue of color, some of the officials in a BAMF or in these people who conduct the interviews, they have a mentality, a very biased mentality against color. Not all of them, but a few of them. So sometimes some people are denied the possibility to receive the protection on the basis of color. That's very common, and I believe so many people have been victims of this. And the other factor of religion, so many these interviewers in the BAMF, or even the judges themselves, or the legal bodies in this country, they have a belief that some people are safer in their countries under their religions than other people. So they may sometimes they make judgments basing on your religious background, whether you're Catholic or Protestant. They'll be like, okay, in your country, Catholics are not attacked so much. Then maybe in Arab countries, Muslims are attacked so much. So you may be denied the protection on basis of your religion. Then also the country of origin. Of late, or not even of late, this has been an issue, or a very serious factor that these European countries have put up what we call safe countries and non-safe countries for LGBTI people to live. But in my view and perspective, I don't believe in this ideology that there are safe countries to live as SOGI people and there are unsafe countries to live as, because even the countries we look to as role models, for example, Germany, we still see homophobia happening in Germany, yet it's a very developed country. It's, we have laws protecting LGBT people, but you'll find that at some certain levels or in certain cases, you'll find homophobia. So I wonder why these European governments have labeled some countries to be safe and then some other countries not to be safe. And so this has been a very big factor leading to some people to be denied asylum, to be given negative responses when they seek asylum on a basis that they come from some countries which they consider to be safe. So that's also a very big factor. Then we have the introduction of new laws. I have witnessed this of late, that there are new laws which are being brought on table to limit or to limit the number of refugees or SOGI refugees coming into Europe rather. So for example, just recently I was interacting with one LGBTI asylum seeker in Munich, where I've been living, and he told me he received a letter from police, and he was summoned to court to defend himself, how he came to Germany, and they were claiming that he lied to the embassy back in his country, that is Uganda, that he was coming to Germany as a tourist. Then when he came to Germany, he decided to seek asylum. So they took him to court, and the court judged that he has to pay a fine, claiming that he lied to the embassy back in Uganda, and that he was coming as a tourist, blah, blah, and all that case. So these are now new laws, because for my case, when I just came to Germany, which is 2018, such things never happened to me. I never received any letter from police. I don't know if it was forced, it was not, because you know, at that period, people came within that period of 2018 or even before us, they were not receiving these letters from police, but now it's a common trend, especially in Bavaria, speaking about it because that's where I've been living, and people are receiving letters from police, and they label them liars, that they lied to their embassies back in the country. When they came here, then they seek asylum. So these are some also, this is a very crucial factor, that the moment even the government we have come to seek asylum start to label you as a liar, then what will the body or decision body like BAMF do to you? Which means they already have a different perspective about you. So these new laws, in my view, they are introduced, first of all, to frustrate and also to be basis to deny SOGI members asylum. And I don't know what kind of entry these countries, or for example, Germany, what kind of entry do they want people to come in Germany to seek asylum? Because for days in history, most Ugandans have been coming here by plane. So I don't know if they want Ugandans now also to start going through the waters or through the desert or wherever to reach Germany. Then there you don't have to be labeled a liar. It's quite so traumatizing. I don't really understand all this concept of calling people liars, that they lied to their embassies, then they came here and they seek asylum. And so also the COVID-19 has also been a very big factor in denying people. It's a new factor, but yes, we're going to see that it has so many effects that has led to negative responses to the SOGI asylum claims. So we also have a very, very crucial point of education background and ability to defend claims, or to defend yourself when you're under the panel or the BAMF panel, or when you are being interviewed during these processes. Most cases, the BAMF officials or the courts think that we human beings, we have the same capacities, or we have the same abilities, and the way they would expect one to articulate issues when he's defending himself, they would expect that the same way other people should. Then they forget that there are some people who are not able to defend themselves so well. So basing on their histories of people who have been able to give very strong defenses for themselves in these BAMF interviews, and they get the positive. So when you go there and you may be not so strong in your defense, they may call that a weakness, and they may use that weakness against you to deny you the asylum, to deny you asylum. So and even also the education background. We have different education backgrounds. You will find that so many people, asylum seekers, some of them are not so that much educated like some others, and this can also be a basis to deny you the asylum, because still it goes back to the way you can defend yourself during the BAMF interviews. And this has also brought up questions whereby some people who are able to defend themselves, and some of them are sometimes even not gay, but they know how to juggle around with questions and know how to defend themselves. I've been able to take the places, the rightful places for the LGBTI people who are not able to defend themselves sometimes in these BAMF interviews. Going to the last point for the interest of time, how cases should be handled. In my view, I think officials should not, should put in consideration that we people, we have different abilities. The way they shouldn't start judging people on the basis of how best they can defend themselves, but they should look at the facts, and then they use those to deliver judgments, which I think is the best way to do than looking at how someone else performed in the previous interview and how someone is performing in this interview. Then you conclude your judgment in that manner. Then the issue of safe and non-safe countries should be really looked into, because to my case, there is no safe country when it comes to LGBTI community, because even in US, even Germany, Canada, wherever, we still have issues of homophobia. So why should some African countries be labeled safe? when you come from South Africa, because the South African government scrapped off the anti-homosexuality laws, then they will say that, okay, now that country is very safe, then, you know, but we have the mindsets of the people are not, you know, they are not, sometimes it takes long for people's mindset to accept the LGBT community. So people still get traumatized, people still get attacked, people still get arrested habitually. And so really people deserve protection irrespective of which country they come from, irrespective of the laws in their countries. As long as someone comes up and say, hello, my rights or my life is in threat, that should be the basic fundamental factor to consider than considering other factors like safety of the country and the non-safe, or the country being unsafe. And also, the issue of religious bias should also be really, really looked into when it comes to these kind of judgments. They shouldn't start considering some religions to they shouldn't start considering some religions to be safe for SOGI asylum seekers, and then some religions not to be safe. So that should really also be looked into. Then continuous training, the officials, BAMF officials and other bodies in other European countries. As I said, I only talk about BAMF because I've only been in Germany. Perhaps in future I'll be able to go and see how other things happen in other European countries. But these bodies require continuous training, continuous enlightenment on factors which they should really look at when they are delivering their judgments, and this will help to open their minds towards the world than only having what maybe they train them before they take on these jobs. And so in my conclusion, I want to say that in my conclusion, it's clear, very, very clear that in so many cases, the asylum or SOGI cases are being judged in a very negative way. And we have had so many asylum seekers being denied asylum status in different countries of Europe, basing on very, very different factors. So yes, that's it. However, in another conclusion outside this, I want to be so thankful again to this for this opportunity, first of all, and for the organizers and the initiators of this all SOGI research project. It's really, really a very, very entrepreneurial project, especially for us, people who are refugees, and for us who are very, for example, I want to say that I'm going to be starting my master's degree in human rights and social work. So it's quite an honor for me to be part of this, and I want to thank again Nina. I may not get the opportunity to thank you, so let me thank you now that you've been so fundamental to me. I met you only once in Frankfurt, and you've always been so supportive to me. So I want to thank you, and I'll end here for now. Thank you so much.
Thanks a lot, Edward, for your presentation. It was really insightful, and particularly when you talked about assumption and bias in assessing claims based on SOGI, and also for your reflection on the use of the safe country of origin concept when it comes to LGBTI persons, and also for, let's say, bridging us already to Germany. And with this, I would like to introduce Nina and Menja, our two last presenters. I would ask kindly Edward to please switch your video off, and to Nina and Menja to switch your video on. Hello. So we come to the third presentation, which is, as I said, jointly delivered by Nina and Menja. Nina is one of the researchers of the SOGICA project, so it's actually an honor for me to have her here in the final SOGICA conference. She's a research and teaching fellow at the University of Sussex, and as I said, responsible for the German case study for the SOGICA project. Her research interests include intersection of sexuality, race, and space, as she explored in her PhD thesis, human rights and LGBTIQ+ asylum. Before joining the University of Sussex, Nina worked in different voluntary organizations such as Stratford Rape Crisis, Freedom from Torture Northwest, and the Lesbian Immigration Support Group in Manchester. Menja Cheller, sorry for my pronunciation, is instead Marie Curie Research Fellow at the School of Sociology, Politics and International Studies at the University of Bristol in the UK. She taught courses related to gender and sexuality law, identity and culture, and intersectionality at City University of New York and Columbia University. Menja was also a visiting scholar at the Center for Gender and Sexuality Law at Columbia University and has published extensively on socio-legal resistance, human rights, gender and Islam in India, and on queer asylum politics and practice in Germany. Currently, she is leading an EU-funded project that examines the experiences of LGBTIQ+ people with Muslim background within Germany's asylum system. And as I anticipated, their presentation will focus on LGBTI refugees and social isolation during the pandemic in Germany. So Nina and Menja, the floor is yours and you have 15 minutes. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Denise. I'm not sure, can you see me actually? I think I changed the setting, but can you see my video?
Yeah, we can, Nina.
Okay, so I can't see myself, but it's okay if you see me. And thank you also very much, Edward, for your kind words. And obviously it was a pleasure for me to support you. And also thank you for also speaking last year at our conference. And it was very nice to meet you and see you again today. Yeah, and it's also really great leading on from Edward, because we are also going to be talking about Germany, but we rather address some of the social experiences that LGBTQI refugees go through, and in particular with a view on how COVID-19 has impacted on those experiences. And it's really my pleasure to give this presentation with my colleague Menja, even though we're working on different research projects at different universities. We've been collaborating for more than a year now on different projects. So yeah, thank you for being here with me, Menja.
Thank you for having me.
So Menja will talk a little bit more later on about an online symposium we organized a couple of months ago together with several NGOs that was specifically on the issue on the impact of COVID-19 on LGBTQI refugees. And I just wanted to start with a quote by Ahmed, who gave a presentation during that online symposium, saying, "For some people, isolation can be more dangerous than the pandemic." So we found that really striking. And as I said, Menja is going to talk a little bit more about the online symposium and also about policy recommendations that we drafted out from that symposium on what needs to be done to tackle those issues in a pandemic. But how we actually came to be focusing on this topic was that Menja and I think we both, in both of our research projects, we have a quite collaborative approach with our participants. So we keep in touch with participants we interviewed, and especially at the beginning during the pandemic, we were talking to people and had some really awful stories what they experienced, and I will just show you some of those. So, for example, Livia told us, "I just sat on my bed and wait. I barely leave my room because I have no one to talk to, and because I'm afraid to catch the virus after someone in our camp was tested positive. We cannot even cook for ourselves anymore." So this already relates to what I will be talking about in a minute, that the living conditions for LGBTQI refugees in Germany are quite specific, as they have to share accommodation. Or Angel, who just had received refugee status just before the pandemic started, said, "I feel like every time I take a step forward, I have to take 3 steps backwards. It is really depressing. Life is at a standstill and there's one more road that is blocked." So that feeling of, you fought for your asylum claim for, in her case, I think it was 1.5 years, finally recognized, and then there's the next thing that's happening. Or Sam, who said, I'm very afraid I will lose everything because of the crisis and will be deported. So very, very strong fears of what the pandemic might mean for asylum claims. Or Rosuga, who said, what we are facing now during this crisis is reminding me of the revolution I witnessed in my country. The state of panic, the constant horrific news, and the speed of which new rules and measures are being put in orders is quite triggering and scary. So that's also something to really think about, like how the pandemic might also re-trigger memories that are not very pleasant, basically. So from these accounts that we heard, we decided to have this online symposium that Menja will talk about. But I want to very briefly talk about the accommodation issues in Germany in general, because we can't really understand those experiences if we don't understand what generally is going on. So first of all, to say in Germany, asylum claimants are distributed according to a distribution key. So they can end up in a small village somewhere in the countryside, because every small municipality has to take on asylum claimants. And they can't really decide where they want to live. And most importantly, they have to share accommodation. So often these are quite large accommodation centers where people have to share a room with sometimes 4, sometimes even 8 people. So they don't have any privacy. And obviously in terms of their sexual orientation and gender identity, it is quite tricky. So during our research projects, we heard accounts like, for example, William saying, that is why when we are in the reception centers, we try to hide, you live in the closet because you don't know who's your neighbor. Or Alpheus, who said they start discriminating against you, they start treating you like you're not a human being. So this fear of coming out, of having to hide your SOGI again, so you're coming to Germany, you think like, okay, you can live your sexual orientation, gender identity freely, but then because you have to share accommodation, and you're not really sure how the people are going to respond when they find out that you're gay, you're hiding again. So it's a very tricky situation, what we've heard from many of our participants. Another really big issue is really, as I said before, where people might end up, and what kind of accommodation centers. And these are pictures I took on a journey to one of my participants, so on the way there, and she was actually accommodated in an army camp in the woods. And as you can see there, so there are signs in the woods there that actually say you're not allowed to go in there because it's army shooting territory. And just opposite of that path that you can see that leads into the woods, there was the asylum accommodation. So very, very isolated, and obviously also a quite scary place because it's still used as army practice territory. This accommodation luckily doesn't exist anymore, so they closed it down, but she had to live there for more than a year. And on top of that, not just being in a quite unpleasant environment, very isolated, bus only going 3 times a day, obviously no opportunity to go to groups and organizations and accessing support. So very, very difficult situation that's already been there before COVID started, for many LGBTQI refugees. On top of that, I mean, we don't really want to make up a split between urban and rural because, of course, transphobia, homophobia, racism also exist in urban areas. But because of being so isolated, experiencing trans and homophobia in those rural areas can heighten the isolation. So as one counselor at the Trans and Intersex Counseling Center in Munich said, So we have trans refugees who end up in deep rural parts where the migrants in Bavarian are placed. We have a lot of German people who are fleeing from the countryside to Munich because the countryside is often transphobic. But in contrast to the German people, asylum claimants, as I said before, can't decide where to live. So they have to stick it out in those rural areas, or any area where they might experience trans homophobia or racism. And there have been some improvements in terms of, because the NGOs we've been also working with, they have put a lot of pressure on the government that this is changing, and sometimes now relocation requests are successful, but still often it's very difficult to get a person relocated to another area. And with that also, racism that people experience, so I think that's also important to again look at the intersectional experiences of LGBTQI claimants, that it's not just within the accommodation centers, but also outside the experiences with racism in rural areas or also the urban centers, refuginess, so to speak, or anti-Black racism people also experience, and other forms of racism. So as Winifred said, lesbians shouldn't be taken to villages where they're not wanted. They should stay here in the town where they are wanted. Why do they send them to the village? They can't express themselves in villages. So it's a combination of different identities that really impact when people are allocated in very isolated areas. Okay, but I stop here and I pass the ball on to Menja to tell you a little bit more about our symposium and our policy recommendations.
Thank you, Nina. Thank you so much for this really good context and introduction. I think just in terms of the conference, which has been organized by the Queer European Asylum Network, which is a very new network and has actually come into place partially because of COVID-19. When we decided, a group of NGOs and activists and scholars like Nina and I in Germany, that we wanted to organize something quite substantial to bring to the fore, to render visible, particularly the experience of LGBTQI refugees and people on the move more generally, who have actually within the discussion and the media representation on the COVID-19 crisis and refugees has been completely sidelined. We realized that we know very little about these particular experiences. All we know is that the camps as such, as a place of humanitarian concern, has gradually shifted to a place of law and order. And that the places, these camps have been shut down once the lockdown started. Now it has been going out of lockdown, but mid-March when the lockdown started, people have been actually trapped in these camps. And as Nina just said, most of these camps are located in very rural areas where they're already isolated. And for many of our participants, one of the major things, what they were telling us, is that they feed off and gain energy and confidence and hope is to be in touch with their community. And that's something that Edward in the previous presentation has also alluded to, how important it is to be a part of a community, be it an LGBTQI community, be the refugee community, and being entirely cut off from all these social interactions has severe impacts on our participants that we wanted to highlight more in depth with the symposium. So if you go on the website, and I have put the link in here, which is www.queereuropeanasylum.org, you will find all the recordings from the symposium if you're interested. But I will continue now to kind of say a little bit more about what we found or what came out of the symposium, what were the findings, what have we been discussing, and what kind of policy reform or policy recommendations have we been formulating based on the symposium. And Nina, if you could. Great, thank you. So the Queer European Asylum was a virtual symposium where we had 4 panels. One was on the European perspective that was co-organized with the Council of Europe. We had another panel on trauma and isolation, and a panel on health, and a panel on the legal aspect of COVID-19. And I will focus here particularly on the panel, on the findings from the panels that came out of the health and social isolation and trauma panels. And also I will particularly focus the discussion today on Germany, just because the talks that we featured in the symposium and the voices were mostly from Germany. So if you can move on. Next slide. Thank you. So one of the findings is obviously that this lockdown has exacerbated the isolation of LGBTQI asylum seekers and refugees who already have been in isolation. Now they're, as I said, now they're cut off. We have to imagine that they're now locked into rooms where they spend most of the day with 5 to 6 other people sometimes, where they share bathrooms with up to 20 people. They're not allowed to cook. They cannot go outside. We had our participants saying that they cannot go for walks. So there is an entire, like the measure of isolation is really, really extreme. What they were also telling us is that the homophobia, transphobia, misogyny within the camps has actually exacerbated, and that's something that we have also seen with sexual violence, not just within the camps, but more generally in the population, as well as the homophobia more generally. And we have this intersectionality now of sexual violence, homophobia, as well as to a certain extent racism. Where particularly women have been subject to sexual violence. We have heard from lesbian women, and some of them that we know, who have been trapped into rooms where they cannot lock doors, for example, who have already been sexually assaulted by inmates from camps, as well as from supervisors in the camps, and have now been basically exposed to these kind of sexual violence and no way to escape. In fact, one of our participants has been raped and has thereafter been relocated to a safe housing facility, but it remains to say it shouldn't come to that in order to take action. As I said, there is a lack of access to community now. Wi-Fi connections in the camps are quite bad most of the time. People can access WhatsApp or very sporadically. They can access online meetings that are provided by LGBTQI organizations or refugee organizations. So they remain within that isolatory bubble, unfortunately. And there is also a call on authorities to improve Wi-Fi connections within the camps. Again, something that should not just be an urgency during such a pandemic. Another thing that came out is access to healthcare. We know that LGBTQI persons are particularly vulnerable in this regard and have special needs when it comes down to healthcare. And access to healthcare has been curtailed. We know of people who were really afraid of not getting their medication, for example, or their hormones. Not all cases, I have to say, have been confirmed like that. Some of them did get their hormones, but there is an inhibition or a fear of not being able to access healthcare centers, who often have people working who have racist or homophobic views to begin with. Can you go one slide further? Yeah, so we have come up with some policy recommendations, which you can also access through our website. But I would like to briefly just kind of articulate here a little bit, or talk about it. One of the things I think that needs to be changed, and again, not just in the context of the pandemic, is the centralized accommodation camps that puts different people together into one room, that has always exposed LGBTQI persons to violence and marginalization, and that they will be given either single rooms or provided with safe housing otherwise. Another thing, again, as I've mentioned, is the Wi-Fi connection. That's really important to all our research participants. Can you go on? And it is particularly important that we also recognize gender-based violence during such a pandemic and how it has been exacerbated. It's also something that is not just a problem during the pandemic, but something that is very often overlooked, that we have women who are subject to sexualized violence on a much higher level, very often than gay men, for example. Another recommendation that we would make is that people have access to counseling and support services at all times. Again, that goes together with Wi-Fi connection, the certain presence of LGBTQI supporters and activists and counselors, something that has been gone amiss at least in the beginning of the crisis, and I think has been slowly reestablished as people also reconfigure ways in which they can get in touch with LGBTQI asylum claimants. Can you just... and in conclusion, I would say it is really important, and it has been said before in a presentation by Tina Dixon and Paul Dillon, that what we see, the kind of challenges that we see in terms of social isolation and trauma for LGBTQI asylum claimants is not something new. It's not something that has just come up with this pandemic. But it's also not something that just applies to them as a particular vulnerable group. And I think we must recognize that these kind of systemic racism, systemic homophobia, systemic transphobia and interphobia, that we always take this into consideration when we're trying to find ways in which we can improve people's lives during such a crisis. And Nina and I both very ardently support the argument that we have to start looking at particularly vulnerable groups in order to find solutions that work for all. And I think we speak to all of those who are deeply ingrained, whose activism and scholarship is ingrained in intersectionality and critical gender, queer and sexuality studies in terms of looking at these intersections and how they play out within these different contexts. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Nina and Menja. Sorry. Okay, thanks a lot for your presentation and for touching upon many important points. I think that your presentation nicely, let's say, linked to the first one, because you really went to the core of what we are living nowadays and the inequalities that Gerardo and Edward talked about during their presentation, as we see, and are also exacerbated during the pandemic. And I particularly welcomed what you said at the end of your presentation, Menja, regarding the importance of looking at the most vulnerable groups in order to look for solution for all.